October 1988. SCP Foundation agent Cyril Novak and Diana Fisher had been dispatched to Austria's capital city, Vienna, to investigate a series of mysterious, unexplained disappearances. The Foundation was unsure if these events were connected or even anomalous in nature, but they had reason to believe that something was lurking beneath the dark streets of Vienna. A Foundation operative embedded in local law enforcement informed the organization that the authorities were panicking, with an emphasis on withholding information about these disappearances from the public and the media. Novak and Fisher conducted a survey of the city, observing the streets at night and keeping a watchful eye on those who they deemed at risk. It was the undesirables of society that were disappearing in droves. Unsupervised children, vagrants, the homeless, all those that were indisposed, vulnerable, and otherwise at risk of being forgotten by society were potential victims. According to several sources, these disappearances were taking place near access points to the city's subterranean infrastructure, sewer holes, access tunnels, storm drains. Anywhere that led to the underground was a potential risk site. After a few days of standard exploration and information gathering around Vienna, Novak and Fisher moved on to interviews with law enforcement and public officials. Using a variety of cover stories, they managed to pry out a deadly secret from the mouth of the police chief. Human remains had been recovered near the disappearance sites. The authorities opted to keep them a secret from the public, so as not to cause any panic of a crazed serial killer on the loose, or inspire fears of something even worse lurking in the city's underground. The agents seized the 3 cadavers and alerted the Foundation that their mission had been progressing as expected. The bodies were transported to Humanoid Containment Site 282 in Graz, Austria, where they were immediately examined by Dr. Felix Gartner, who performed an autopsy on the 3 corpses. If the Foundation was unsure about anomalous involvement before, they were certain of it now. The bodies were in shambles, mutilated beyond belief, and altered into an almost unrecognizable state. The mere stench of them caused personnel working with them to rush to the bathroom, and even those that could typically keep their lunch down had a difficult time examining them. Cadaver A, the cause of death was determined to be from exsanguination, or the extreme loss of blood. Cadaver B was missing some important fleshy components inside and out, some of which had been removed entirely. The cause of death was presumed to be traumatic cardiac arrest. The 3rd corpse, Cadaver C, was barely a body. Instead, it was a collection of bones and fluids. The cause of death, because of the opaque conditions the cadaver was found in, was unknown. These grisly deaths were only the start of the Foundation's containment of this anomaly, and are far from the worst this file has to offer. This is SCP Explained, and today we're going to be looking at SCP-3288, a collection of entities otherwise known as the Aristocrats. Dr. Gartner's analysis of the cadavers came to a single conclusion: a human could not do this. In fact, he compared the deceased's injuries and conditions with the bodies of victims of hyena attacks. All sustained injuries weren't the result of a blunt object, sharpened blade, or a firearm, but instead resulted from a combination of teeth, claws, and raw physical strength. The bodies had abnormally large bite marks, approximately 6 times the size of adult human teeth. Yet closer analysis revealed that the indentations did, in fact, coincide with human teeth. Whatever did this possessed more than 60 teeth, unevenly distributed over 6 distinct rows, and required jaws much larger than those of ordinary humans. There were unique patterns among these markings, suggesting that it wasn't a single entity that ravaged these corpses, but multiple. There was no doubt about it. These deaths were anomalous in nature. The Foundation issued a designation for the entities responsible, SCP-3288, and deployed Mobile Task Force Sigma-6, Hellsingers, a special unit trained to capture deadly anomalies in the field, to bring SCP-3288 into Foundation custody. The operatives were tasked with patrolling the Leopoldstadt district, the area where most of the disappearances had occurred. Secrecy, as usual, was a top priority, and members of the task force took extra care to conduct their operations away from the public eye. As the purpose of this mission was to contain the entities for further study, the operatives were also ordered to refrain from lethal force, and to target SCP-3288 with tracking darts to prevent them from escaping. The task force divided up their assignments. 12 operatives would patrol the district and search for any suspicious activity, while 10 others would remain watch in positions with unrestricted views of sewer holes and other underground access areas. For the first few hours, things were quiet, but then 2 operatives stationed near the Danube Canal made a report to the rest of the team. Someone near the canal was screaming, not loudly, but in a muffled, faint way. The operatives took initiatives and ran off to investigate the matter themselves, requesting backup at the same time. Reinforcements arrived less than 3 minutes later, but their teammates could not be found. Moments later, their bodies were discovered by another operative, mangled beyond belief. Both operatives were killed, and alongside them was a half-consumed corpse of a local civilian as well. One operative's body was recovered from the canal, while the other was found after following a trail of blood and fluids into an alleyway. But despite the loss of life, the mission was still deemed a success. Before being mauled by the SCP-3288 instance, the task force operative managed to shoot the entity with a tracking bullet, a piece of technology utilizing satellite location, which allowed the rest of the team to follow the entity into the sewers. The tracking was working perfectly, and the entity was shown to be fleeing into Vienna's sewer system, until the signal faded somewhere near the Hofburg, a palace constructed centuries ago that was once host to the Habsburg dynasty, and presently serves as the seat of power for the President of Austria. The team was confused, as the fading nature of the signal suggested that the tracking bullet had been brought into a location far deeper than the Viennese sewers were believed to accommodate. The mission moved onward, into the depths of the sewers, in pursuit of SCP-3288. The following day, the task force had assembled a strategy for mapping and exploring the Viennese sewer system. Constructed in the mid-19th century, these sewers were part of a larger network of subterranean tunnels that include catacombs, abandoned wine cellars, and underground rivers. Without proper planning and clear communication, death could be a very real possibility, and not even one caused by SCP-3288. The task force was divided into 4 teams of 5, 3 to investigate the sewers and 1 to remain on standby. By triangulating the location of the tracked instance, the Foundation was able to pinpoint the general area they would need to explore. By blocking off certain exits and surface access points, they hoped to minimize the possibility of the entity's escape or exposure to the public. While the primary objective remained containing an SCP-3288 instance for scientific research, lethal force was authorized to be used in case of emergencies. The Foundation valued the lives of its trained soldiers and put them above nearly anything. Still, the authorization of lethal force spelled impending doom for many experienced veterans of the task force. They knew all too well about what kind of entity they were up against when the Foundation opted to skip the containment step and prioritize getting out alive. A team of operatives reached their destination safely, but didn't discover anything of significance during their trek through the sewers of Vienna, at least, not at first. After several hours of investigation, they encountered human skeletal remains while making their way through waist-deep sewage. One member of the task force pointed out a loose brick in the wall, and then another did some minutes later. Inspection of the area found a number of loose-fitting bricks that were able to be removed with ease, as if they were put there to hide something. When the entryway was fully unearthed, it revealed a previously unseen chamber, whose walls were engraved with the House of Habsburg's coat of arms. Operatives inside of the chamber immediately knew what they were looking at, a family crypt of royal bloodline, never uncovered before. The forgotten atmosphere made them feel like they were discovering a secret that they were never supposed to know. 24 sarcophagi were found within the chamber, and historical records of the sewers and surrounding area mention nothing about a crypt beneath the palace. Multiple statues were recovered from the chamber as well, depicting veiled women with hushed expressions, holding a finger to their lips, almost as if to say that this place was a royal secret, and trespassing had grave consequences. Get it? Grave consequences? No? Okay, moving on. Thought I would be funny today. The tombs themselves were intricate, decorated with ornate jewelry and various expensive embellishments, but did not include placards, markings, or any indication as to who was entombed within. When the operatives opened the sarcophagi, they were disgusted. The skeletal remains of over 300 bodies, all displaying severe and likely fatal birth deformities. The team was at a loss. What was the meaning of this room? The entrance had been destroyed some time ago, with stairs shattered and buried among the stone. Near the other side of the row of tombs was a vault door, coated in bronze and bearing the coat of arms of the Habsburgs. A seal written in Latin was engraved beneath the coat. Translated, it read, "For purity of blood." The task force tried to pry the door open, but it wouldn't budge. Opening it would require special equipment, and after what they had witnessed inside the sarcophagus, some members of the team were even hesitant to continue trying. The team was ordered by the supervising team to hold their location and await the arrival of another team that would open the door. Foundation agents on the surface organized a temporary evacuation of the Hofburg building. The team waited for backup throughout the night. They made attempts to open the vault, but to no avail. Once the surface had been properly evacuated and an infiltration team arrived inside the chamber to assist with the vault door, the gate was able to be opened using oxygen fuel cutting torches over a period of 2 hours. Once opened, the team was met with an ominous descending staircase, leading to an unknown dark location underneath the palace. An 8-man squad, heavily armed and equipped with recording devices, ventured down the staircase. Radio transmissions from the squad grew increasingly faint over time. When they reached the estimated 65-meter mark underground, their communications arrays were barely audible. At the bottom of the stairwell was an ornate foyer. Instead of decaying gray stone walls and oceans of sewage, there were marble floors, with felted carpets and white painted walls and ceilings. This chamber was found to be architecturally identical to a certain wing of the Hofburg Palace. Furthermore, the chamber was clearly built in the 18th century, as many aesthetic choices popular during that era were clearly present. Much like the crypt, there were sculptures and statues, but this time there were also columns, paintings, and tattered tapestries. Some of the operatives admiring the beauty of the room overlooked that on every piece of art, any and all depictions of the human form were defaced and altered. The air was rancid, with operatives describing the odor as similar to rotten meat and stale sweat. The floor and walls were discolored with what appeared to be dried old blood. Regardless, they moved forward. In between the space equivalent of the Hofburg Imperial Library was a laboratory, not found in the palace above. An operative collected numerous documents relating to alchemy, biology, and the occult, as well as a journal of transactions, contracts, and private writings. These documents were delivered to above personnel and were later translated by Foundation personnel. All along the chamber were human remains, decomposing and strewn around the palace. Suddenly, a bell tolled, and the music of a pipe organ began playing discordantly for over 3 minutes. Operatives hid themselves and deactivated their flashlights, some hiding behind the curtains of a large opera hall, and others behind large instruments. They heard footsteps in the distance. Minutes later, a group of figures emerged into the palace hall. These entities the Foundation had classified as SCP-3288 were now fully visible. Their outfits were typical of the 18th century, containing deep shades of red that contrasted with their stark white skin, porcelain masquerade masks, and powdered wigs. Their bodies were monstrous, with arms dragging across the floor, uneven faces, long fingers, some possessing more than 10 of, and hunched backs. A pair of smaller instances entered behind the horde of others, and one blew a rusted trumpet, while the other held a banner depicting the Habsburg crest. The trumpeter began speaking, but its words were unintelligible and raw, guttural moans. They ran out of the way, their stunted legs causing them to trip across the floor. There were now over several hundred SCP-3288 instances inside the ballroom. Multiple operatives activated silent distress calls, requesting backup to deal with the massive entities they would have to contain. These instances bowed their heads, and another mass of footsteps were heard as a group of SCP-3288 instances carried a morbidly obese instance atop a throne. It wore a cape, a red veil in place of a mask, and a crown too small for its head. It was evident that this was their leader. A large cauldron was placed before the king. A small instance climbed atop the king's shoulder and lifted the entity's veil to speak to it. The cauldron was uncovered, and the king lurched forward, grabbing the tub and pouring its contents down its massive mouth. Some of the king's disgusting meal spilled from its mouth, revealing a small human child with severe deformities. The SCP-3288 instances roared in applause and began to feast, all while the cacophony of noise brought on by the various instruments inside the ballroom raged on. An operative hiding behind a harpsichord was discovered by an SCP-3288 instance and quickly consumed by it, in the feeding frenzy the entities were engaged in. Still barely alive before being entirely digested by the entity, the consumed task force operative triggered an explosive device from within the entity's stomach. With a look of immediate discomfort, the entity suddenly exploded, taking out several other nearby 3288 instances with the blast. The entities were distraught, and while they were distracted, the task force leapt into action and rendered the remaining SCP-3288 instances not killed by the explosion unconscious using devices loaded with a gas. As Foundation reinforcements arrived, the surviving SCP-3288 entities were contained and moved to Site-282, including the massive king, whose body was transported using a specialized crane. After the removal of all remaining entities, the palace was filled with cement and reburied, with the Foundation making sure that no one would ever discover it again. After the king was contained, Foundation personnel were shocked to discover that the entity could speak. In an interview with the hulking monstrosity, it revealed that its name was Maximilian the Great, a patriarch of the House Habsburg. The entity's eyesight was severely damaged from centuries of living underground, and the Foundation was able to get the king to comply by shining powerful lights in its eyes. The entity was delusional, believing itself still to be inside the palace and referring to the doctor as nothing more than mere meat, which it wanted to consume. When the doctor was able to convince the king that he too was noble blood, which the king believed due to his unstable mental state, the entity uttered a chilling statement.
"We are of the same noble blood, but some are more noble than others. Our bloodline is pure, untainted by outsiders. We do not eat human, we eat peasants. We eat undesirables. We devour life undeserving of life. That is the nature of nobility. What else would be the point?"
DNA testing revealed that the king was, in fact, descended from the House of Habsburgs, as all SCP-3288 instances were. But what of the journal entries discovered inside the palace? After translation, the Foundation found that they contained the writings of Leopold I, a Holy Roman Emperor and member of the Habsburg House in the early 1700s. His writings detailed his desire to claim power over the royal family, as well as his fears of an increased number of inbred, deformed members of the Habsburg House. Leopold details meeting a woman of unknown origin who promised him that his family name could live forever. She taught him arcane knowledge involving experimentations of the flesh. Small animals, and eventually humans, were subject to Leopold's disgusting, unholy experiments. Even his mystical teacher became disgusted with what her tutelage had wrought. As payment, she demanded that Leopold cease his reign, deliver his land and wealth to common people, and destroy his various deeds and titles. Leopold refused and had the woman burned at the stake for witchcraft. Eventually, Leopold's experiments to make his bloodline perpetual resulted in the creation of SCP-3288. Years of inclusive family ties mutated over one another, generation after generation, until a horde of SCP-3288 living underneath the palace and feasting on a diet of human meat were created. For years, the surface Habsburgs catered to SCP-3288's depraved and disgusting needs, providing them with a slew of humans to feast on, and a lavish lifestyle akin to the one lived by the nobility above. One other document revealed to the Foundation that there were multiple hives of SCP-3288 existing throughout Europe. Most were discovered and neutralized, but the original writing was heavily damaged by mold, meaning that there were some locations the Foundation was unable to uncover. Colonies of SCP-3288 instances buried underground, snatching humans without any care, mutating their own deformities, and living horribly, unable to be stopped. A captured SCP-3288 instance in Germany revealed that there was another entity, similar to the king in authority, by the name of the Empress. It had this to say to the Foundation upon being contained.
"The meek will beget the strong. The doomed will beget the chosen. Don't you see? The greedy will devour the charitable, and the merciless will ravage the peaceful. We will make the world as perfect as us. We will all be aristocrats in the end, and our dynasty will never die.
Now go watch SCP-1678 Unlondon and SCP-5545 Mysterious Tunnels in Antarctica Abnormality for more anomalous subterranean locations.